Welcome back. Most South Africans seem to have adhered to the regulations of lockdown levels 5 and 4. Many rules have now been relaxed under level 3, but some people are feeling left out. You can go to church, but can't travel to see your family. You can take public transport, but can't exercise in groups. So to talk more about the concept of fairness, I'm joined now by clinical psychologist Santosh Pillay. Santosh, thanks a lot for joining us this evening. You say, in fact, that South Africa could see a massive rise in depression following the pandemic. In fact, we are in an emotional tsunami, according to you.
Thank you for having me on the show. Thanks for raising these important issues around mental health. I think these are conversations that we have to have in parallel with the conversations about social distancing and hand washing, for example. I did say previously in an article published online that we are in an emotional tsunami. And I think one of the reasons I used that particular phrase was because with every biological pandemic that we experience, there is a parallel emotional epidemic that happens. And often that goes quite unnoticed. And I think we're looking at issues like depression, we're looking at trauma, grief, fear, uncertainty, anxiety, and we're looking at all of the related mental health repercussions of retrenchments, of job losses, etc. So I think it's unsurprising that there will be this emotional tsunami, and unsurprising that there'll also be a spike in depression. Both normal distress that I think all people are experiencing, but also clinical depression that's going to require professional treatment. So I think it's a myriad of issues that we have to pay particular attention to.
Yeah. Let's speak a little bit about the concept of fairness, Santosh, and how we really process it in our psyche. So under level 5 of the lockdown, all citizens obliged to the cause by government as well as the NCC. However, as we move to level 4 and now 3, the concept of fairness, i.e. if this group has certain liberties, then why can't we? If churches can be declared as essential, why can't hairdressers? That concept is playing a major role. How are we processing it as a citizen?
Absolutely. I think you raise an absolutely important issue. And I think this is why the levels seem to be slightly misguided and are not going to work the way governments envision them to work, irrespective of the good intentions behind it. And already we're seeing critiques, not only from civil society, but even from top scientists around the idea of these levels being completely irrational to some extent, but also being something that is not going to work for the reasons that you mentioned. Because in the early stages of the lockdown, there was a greater sense of solidarity and goodwill that was given to President Cyril Ramaphosa and his team. And I think there was a sense of we're all in this together in the beginning. But what we've seen with the levels is that now we're not all in this together anymore, that different professions have been stratified and fragmented according to the kind of perceived value that they add to society. And although we could have various arguments about who's more valuable and who's more essential, the bottom line is that society as a whole, psychologically, doesn't feel like they're in this together any longer. And the fact that, for example, a hairdresser can't go to work, but someone who fixes your car can, kind of shows some of the consequences that people are going to experience because of the economic uncertainty related to jobs and job losses, which obviously has a direct impact on mental health.
Yeah. And are we likely to be seeing citizens get more restless as more industries open up and yet a few remain closed? I mean, as alcohol consumption is allowed, but not the sale of tobacco products. I mean, and exactly how is it that South Africans are going to start processing this restlessness, and how is it going to manifest?
Absolutely. I think restlessness might be a massive understatement to what's going to happen. I think at the worst end, we might see civil unrest and even protest. And I think that's not out of the question, given that South Africa is already a very kind of protest-prone and protest-heavy country to begin with. And to be honest, I don't believe that the fear of getting the coronavirus is sufficient grounds for people not to go out and do what they need to do to survive. Because we live in a country where you are at risk of so many things so often, whether it's crime, whether it's violence, whether it's a host of other things that are both endangering your life and your livelihood every single day, even before COVID-19. And so I think we've got to be very wary of the kinds of lives that people live and how our responses to COVID-19 is going to widen inequality, is going to widen poverty, and going to widen unemployment. These are not easy decisions to make. But I think we've got to keep them at the forefront of our mind, because it's not a straightforward solution of simply telling people that you've got to just stay at home for your own safety. That's not how behavior change works.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk a little bit about also what citizens are worried about. I know that you documented certain worries, and clearly COVID-19 or the fear of contracting the virus does not stem top of mind. In fact, it's all about survival from here on.
Yeah, absolutely. Without a doubt. I mean, we already live in the most unequal country in the world based on our Gini coefficient. And I think we've got to keep that in mind, that we were struggling with a massive unemployment crisis. And we've got to look at the social determinants of health that are impacting on people's well-being. You know, the fear of catching the COVID-19 is not at the forefront of people's minds. It can't be. People are dealing with basic bread and butter issues. And although certainly people are, for the most part, trying to be the best citizens that they can be in terms of wearing masks and sanitizing and all of those things, if you don't have money to put food on the table, if you don't have money to send your kids to school, if you don't have money to pay your rent, I mean, these kinds of socioeconomic concerns are certainly going to be far more important to people than adhering to government legislation around catching a virus.
Santosh, another thing that you've raised is the issue around gender-based violence. In fact, you're calling it another epidemic that we're not mindful of, as more and more people are not able to leave their perpetrators and get some fresh air or get some kind of help. It is an epidemic. How rife is it?
I think it's extremely rife. Gender organizations in particular have already documented extremely high rates of calls to their call centers to kind of shelters. We've already seen just in terms of numbers of people reporting gender-based violence to the police. We also know that even before the coronavirus, it was an underreported phenomenon. People are trapped at home with abusive partners that they cannot escape. That is a recipe for disaster. The mental health implications of that are enormous. And I think we have to be sensitive to how there are gender dynamics to the ways in which we are trying to deal with this pandemic.
Now, Santosh Pillay, we're going to leave it there. Clinical psychologists are giving us the latest in terms of the way in which we process fairness as we move from level 4 to now level 3 lockdown, and exactly how is it that we manifest this feeling of unfairness amongst each other in South Africa.